Hello everybody, my name is Miriam Divine and welcome to my channel. Today we're talking about Medea, the ancient woman in Greek mythology that appears, as the boogie woman in a lot of these stories, or as a side character to help out Jason and the other characters. So we're doing this because I drew this wonderful card about Medea when I did my Hecate Shamanic Journey cave exercise a few weeks ago. And that's my quick background for that. And this is not going to be a historical, mythological, review of Medea's life and all her little jobs and tasks that she did. This is more of a unscripted, one-on-one, who really was Medea? As a human being, not as a mythology type of person. So the first question is, did Medea really exist? Did she not exist? It's hard to say. Because we know how writers, we know how, entertainers grab a hold of an idea and gussy it up and make it look pretty and make it sellable so that people will read their stories. And, of course, that's what they did with Medea. They took either a type of woman and elevated her to a single name and made a cool bunch of stories about her and to write her as this, woman, or they took a real woman who was kind of this way, and they might have did a little bit of both, and then write her into the stories and attribute her to things that probably happened to other people or opened over time, that they attribute the stories to her. Now, what are these things they're attributing to her? They're attributing that she was, this charismatic, beautiful siren who sucked in men and did all kinds of killing people and, vengeance and all that kind of stuff. Sure. Could it happen? Yes. What happens, I don't know about you, but when you piss off the right type of woman, especially a very smart, beautiful woman who's used to dealing with certain things, she deals with the way she knows how to deal with it. And if Medea was attributed to killing kings and princes and stuff, that happened all the time with royalty in the past. So it wouldn't surprise me that Medea was attributed to these things of killing the kings and the princes and stuff. And then we come back to, there's also Medea as this, like an outsider woman, a woman who men are afraid of, which make her an excellent, storyline, because she can do things with her beauty, with her voice, with her, magic, because she's a sorceress, well, right? She can do magical herbs and stuff and poison you. Very feminine aspects. But men are scared of this, which makes great storylines, especially if you're selling to a bunch of men, which is what they sold to back in the day. So let's get away from the mythology. Let's get away from Jason and the Argonauts and the Golden Fleeces and Athens and Corinth and how she kills her kids and all this stuff, because that's a bunch of, stories. Could they have happened? And if you want to watch those stories, there's great movies, there's great history. You can read about it on the internet. You can find a bazillion YouTube videos about the history of Medea. But who was Medea really? Who was she as a person? And it could have been anybody. It could have been any princess or something from this kingdom. And I personally think she probably was a real figure that eventually gets twisted into the stories and storyline. So we look at where she grew up. We look at who her family was. We look at, types of things around her that would shape her into this, I'm easily going to kill, or make the Greek think she's easily going to kill off royalty and stuff, which probably wasn't as common in Greek culture, but was probably very common where she grew up, because she grew up in more of a frontier area where death itself, if you read a book, I think it was called On Killing, it talks about desensitization to death, even through like working on farms and stuff like that. Well, this area was different. It wedged in over there in Caucasus, wedged in between the Caucasus Mountains, the greater and the lesser, right off the Black Sea. And so it was very far removed from Greece. You had to sail all the way across the Black Sea to trade and back. And they did trade. They traded back and forth. I don't know if there were land routes, probably not a lot, because they had to go through a lot of spot through Iberia and all that kind of stuff and up over the mountains. So it was probably a sea trade. And this area is very isolated. once that area is congealed by her father's family into a kingdom, there's not a lot of people who are going to attack it because you got to get over those mountains. It's very hard, so that it becomes a fairly, frontier, isolated area. And of course, the people up in the mountains are, if you know about that type of people, they're very nomadic and tribal, and they're not really formed into a, society type of thing, or they are, but it's a more nomadic society kind of thing. And so they travel around and do tribal movements and stuff, migration. Well, once they form the kingdom in this little area, which is a fertile little valley wedged in there, it also is a temperate rainforest, which means lots of rain, lots of water. And if you've ever been in a temperate rainforest, it is very, very earthy. It is damp earth, mud, muck, wetlands down in the valley. And so this is a very vibe that will create certain types of people if you live in that area. And you can look up, temperate rainforests and look at some of the pictures. And that's what we're thinking of, back in the day when they were there. And then it goes up into the hills around it, up into the foothills of the mountains. And it's a very more arid steppe type of plateau kind of area where it's a little bit more, still probably has a lot of rain, but has more steppe land. And so that's probably where they grew more of their crops if they could, in that region between the two. And I believe, their big export was like millet and pheasants and animals and stuff like that. There were certain things that they could export, and they probably got in stuff from Greece, from the other side, right? And of course, this area being very isolated from the center of culture, yet they were smart enough to be educated and stuff, it probably gave, the grass is greener on the other side to Medea, maybe her sister and brother, that, hey, there's a kingdom way over there that looks really cool, but we're not there. We're stuck over here, kind of thing. And so I think that's part of Medea's motivation, why she eventually gets older and leaves. There's some other concepts on why she was this type of woman who believes it's okay to take care of business. Number one, she was royalty, as we talked about before. And royal families, killing your brothers. In fact, in her history, if you look back, her dad's brothers or uncles or somebody, they all fought each other and killed each other to create the kingdom in the first place. And so Medea's not too far distant from this. And so she gets that killing is something happens to royalty all the time. And especially, I don't know, the history back then, maybe some of my historical people who studied ancient Georgian history and before Georgia history could, enlighten me a little bit, send me some information on this, on how that all forms up. But Medea grows up in this, kind of uncouth, very distant, dreaming of a faraway land. She also has a brother and a sister. And they talk about whether the brother was a half-brother and a half-sister or a real brother and a half-sister. We don't know because the storylines get kind of blurred out in here. But they do talk about Dad having multiple wives. And whether they talk about whether he divorces his previous wives or kills them or whatever, we don't know. We do know Medea's mom, Idela, is, they don't talk a lot about her, but they say that she was very pretty and she was very smart. And I believe Medea, they also talk about her being very pretty and very smart and very charismatic and being able to use her siren ability, her dark feminine powers, to get what she wants. Which doesn't surprise me as a priestess of Hecate, right? Having a little bit of siren in her and a dark aspect. Not necessarily all rainbows and unicorns, but a little bit more practical and earthy type of person. Well, magic itself, of course, is passed down through lineage. It's not passed down from a book in a school. We'd love to say it's all Harry Potter, let's all go to school and learn something. No, a lot of times it's lineage passed down or self-study or something like this. Well, Medea probably gets her magic from her mom or her grandmother. And it was probably passed down from grandmother to mother, mother to daughter, daughter to granddaughter, and passed down through the history. And so Medea probably has a very close connection with her mom. Well, her mom, queen of this thing, they don't really say she's queen, but I assume she must have been queen because she was married to her dad, Atides. she's kind of jaded. Her dad's keeps marrying, remarrying people, whether she gets murdered or he makes her a mistress or a first wife or whatever. He's accredited to having multiple wives. Well, have you ever had a mother-daughter relationship where mom is a little bit pissed off and she talks to her kids? Right. So Medea was probably very influenced by her mother's experience. Also, she was influenced by this, hey, there's this beautiful place over here. I got my pink goggles on. It looks great over there. It kind of sucks over here, where she's at. And she sees her dad. Her dad is also a big influence on children. Well, her dad's lineage passes down from father to son, et cetera, that way. But she sees her dad playing this guy role of being kind of a jerk, kind of being like a player or a lecherous kind of guy who she might have a half-sister. She may not, but he's definitely accredited to having multiple wives, including, they even read that she had the wife of Hecate, which I'm kind of like, he might have been a magical guy or something, but that kind of story, who knows? So we have Medea growing up in this environment, where she wants to get out. She sees, men not being at their best. She's in a royal environment where death is more common and probably, noble side or whatever you want to call it is more happening. Her dad's attributed to being the son of Helios, which makes her the niece to Circe, which is also a very magical person in history. We might do a video on her one day too. But we have Medea, super smart, super siren, super whatever, and she wants to get out. Well, she gets a chance. Jason shows up. She helps him out, whether she really falls in love with him or not, but they get married once they leave and they get back. And then she goes through a bunch of adventures where she's attributed to killing off a bunch of people, her own kids, kings, princesses, all this different kinds of stuff. Watch the videos. You'll see about that. So this is kind of how she developed into the type of person. It's kind of like once you start down the side of the dark side, forever will dominate your destiny. Well, she grew up with a lot of death. She grew up with nobility killing itself. She grew up with, sorcery and the ability to use poisons with a very, siren type of concept to continue to go on. And so she uses all these abilities that she has. And of course, when you take her out of her culture that she's in and put her in a different culture, they look at her as a barbarian, as this, slightly different looking, because she's a slightly, the Georgian women look slightly different than the Greek women, if you really, look at the differences, but she was definitely a little different. And so they attribute her to being this strange, different, evil thing, or lecherous woman, or not lecherous, that's a bad term, boogie woman, I guess, that, don't get with this type of woman, she's going to do this to you. And a lot of men were probably scared of that, and it made a great storyline. So that's where I really think Medea was. And eventually she makes it back to her home country and puts her son as king on the throne. So that's kind of where we got who Medea really was from a roots type of concept. Now, her history, of course, in the mythos, we don't know. All we know is that that's what the writer says she was, that she was a jaded woman, the type of woman that if you piss off will go slash your tires, sort through your cell phone and find all your contacts, and then, write a bunch of nastygram emails, or I guess texts in today's day in society, and be kind of crazy. I've known women like that. I've even thought a little bit like that. There's been some people who've driven me to those kind of points. Not that I have actually gone out and murdered my own kids or anything crazy like that, because that's a little bit wild. But this is who she was. So this magical sorceress who was a very siren type of person, who did what she had to do in a royal environment to survive. And that's what I have for you today. I love you all. Bye. Have a good one.